Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Rouge Rugby podcast, where we focus on real Canadian rugby. I'm Stu Hardy, joined, as always, by Derek Brissett. Derek, we're coming to the end of the autumn international schedule. Were you able to catch any games over the weekend? I know there was one that I chose to miss that I'm sure a lot of English and non-Welsh fans were reveling in.
The non-Welsh fans. Yeah, it's a tough one for you. It's a tough week for you, Stu. But I mean, you always tell me that it's like you kind of go with that MJ from No Way Home sort of approach to life of it's just if you assume that you're going to be disappointed, you're never actually disappointed. So that at least is what you seem to imply to me is how you live life as a Welsh rugby fan, anyways.
Yeah, well, being competitive and dire, I don't think that's the worst thing in the world.
Hey, but you know what? The trade-off though is that you're good at soccer again. Right? Is that the trade-off? Is that things?
Wales has always been a football, or as you call, soccer-loving nation. I don't know what you're talking about. Rugby? They've never heard of it. I don't know what you're getting at, mate.
I was gonna say, you know what's funny is that obviously the World Cup is happening now. I really don't know a whole lot about soccer, and I saw like the rant, like I don't know, so I think it's like somebody had it on like the radio or something at work, but they were saying that it's like Wales hasn't been in the World Cup for like 50 years or something, and
yeah, since the 50s,
since the 50s,
so approaching like 70 years at this point.
And my brain, I was like, oh, that seems weird. I just kind of always assumed all the UK countries were good at the sport they created. So, I mean, I kind of learned something. I guess you guys put all your energy into rugby, which
I suppose
maybe that's the problem. The soccer team got too good, and now you're like, there's a transition happening.
I think as well is that when you come to like World Cup qualifications for rugby, we know it's like the quarterfinal teams and then the third best team in the pool for the men's World Cup, at least, go on to automatically qualify for the following World Cup. But with football, it's different. It's only the hosts automatically qualify, like not even the previous winners.
AKA the way it should be.
Well, we can get into that debate in 2031 when the USA have automatically qualified for the World Cup, which may be their first World Cup qualification for a while. We'll get to that later. But
tough week.
Yeah, but that's the bit I've known with like FIFA because when Canada qualified, it was like their first World Cup appearance in however many decades
since the 80s.
Since the 80s. Yeah. So, and it's just like the luck of the draw. So, especially when it comes to European country and like UEFA, obviously there's far more nations within the same space of Canada, so it's only a certain number of nations can get to go through, and if you're in the pool with England or France or Germany, one of those dominant teams, and it's only the top team of that group goes through, then you're out of luck. Yes. You're not making through. So yeah, it is a very complicated process. Something that is to be noted is that when the fake World Cup or FIFA World Cup comes to North America in 2026, it'll actually expand from the current format, which I think is 36 teams, to 48. So far more nations are going to be represented in 4 years' time, and it's something that World Rugby should be looking at, of like expanding the World Cup. But again, we'll get to that later. Now, before we get into the pod itself proper, I'm sure that anyone who has been on Canadian rugby social media has heard about the unfortunate traffic collision that Nick Allen has been in out in Bali. And as such, for those that don't know, Nick Allen was involved in a serious motor vehicle accident in Bali, Indonesia. He was knocked unconscious and sustained severe injuries to his head and extremities. He was rushed to a nearby hospital. At the moment, Nick's friends and family are crowdfunding to help Nick pay for all the expenses incurred after the incident, which are almost entirely medical bills. Due to the current system that Nick has found himself in, he has very minimal coverage, and everything will need to be paid out of pocket. These include doctor, surgeon, specialist consultations, surgery and treatment fees, basic medical supplies, daily hospital bed and room fees, nurse and daily care fees, and miscellaneous hospital fees. Once Nick begins his recovery and is healthy enough to travel back home, there will be more expenses in the way of safe and reliable medical transport and rehabilitation services, all dependent on Nick's condition. These could include physiotherapy, TBI rehab, and possible extensive care needs. The current goal for the donation is set at 550,000 Canadian dollars. And there are links to the GoFundMe by Rugby Canada, Rugby Ontario, the Toronto Arrows, everywhere it seems to be of Canadian rugby Twitter, which is wonderful to see. There are also
I was gonna say I'll add the link into the episode descriptions and stuff too. So wherever you're listening to this, just scroll down.
Yeah, and absolutely, there have been loads of donations so far. So anything from like $20, $100. So the highest donation I've seen at the moment is $10,000. So obviously, very much appreciated, I'm sure, by Nick Allen's friends and family. They are also providing updates. The latest one comes from Sunday, November 20th, saying Nick has been pulling himself up to sit and is becoming more aware of what's going on. He continues to make slow but great progress. We should hopefully have a departure date back to Canada set in the next couple of days. Another thank you goes out to everyone who has donated, shared, and kept Nicky in their thoughts. So, so wonderfully, things seem to be going in, the right direction for Nick's recovery. But obviously, this is just part way step. The current amount raised is just shy of 250,000. So there's still 300,000 more to go. Any contribution can be helped, and I'll be contributing at some point as well. As I said, any donation will obviously go a long way to a son of Rugby Canada and a growing talent who we hope to see well and recovered soon in the next few months. Okay, now let's move on to the meat and potatoes of the episode. So we return to the Netherlands, where Rugby Canada finally have their final group game of the 2019 World Cup against Namibia. It's taken a while to get here, but not a typhoon, COVID-19, and travel plans couldn't only delay the inevitable, as Canada finally got to face Namibia in a neutral venue. And if anyone's been watching the men's 15s over the past couple of years, and it hasn't been great viewing, and yeah, I think that gives the indication of where this scoreline is going.
Oh, man, I was gonna say that's just harsh, man. I know. I mean, it's probably fair, but yeah, tough. I mean, lost. We can get into it though. It's not I mean, that's correct. You finish up the score, and then we'll get into this. It's only. I think Canada maybe should have won this game, though.
Canada probably should have won this game. However, the final score was Canada 37, Namibia 43. So Canada retained the same score they had last week, but Namibia were just able to pip them to the post. It was the first ever win for Namibia over Canada, and as we said, this is 3 years on from the missed World Cup game in Japan. It started off well. Cooper Coates getting the first point on the board with a penalty. But then soon enough, Namibia rolled over for the first try. But it was quickly retaliated by Quatrin getting his first try of the match. And then not long after that, Corey Thomas was able to get his first try of the game as well. Then we unfortunately had Namibia scoring their second try. So it was all being kept really close. And then we had Corey Thomas's second try, Canada's third overall. All of these tries have been spot-on conversions by Cooper Coates. So getting to a good lead. And then just before halftime, Namibia score their third try of the match. And then on the restart, the ball gets kicked to Namibia, who then do a chip kick, which somehow misses any Canadian hands, ends up straight back in Namibian hands. They pass it out wide, and Namibia get their fourth of the game, but miss the conversion. So we are all square at halftime on 24 points each. When both teams came back from the break, it was Canada that got their total moving first, with Quatrin getting his second of the game and Canada's fourth try overall. And then we moved on to Cooper Coates getting a penalty in the 66th minute. He thought he had a try. However, the ball got knocked on in the dead end zone. However, the advantage pulled it back. In hindsight, I think this should have been an opportunity for Canada to kick to the corner, go for the driving maul again. But, you know, and it's all hindsight's 2020, so can't really speak too much of it. Then we out. Then it was.
I'll let you finish up.
Sorry, Namibia had gotten their fifth try of the game from Van der Berg in the 63rd minute, and then it was Coates who got his penalty in the 66th. Then Namibia got their. Namibia then got their sixth try of the game, which was Van der Westhuizen's second of the match in the 72nd minute. This was also not long after Josh Larson got a yellow card. I think that was probably like the big turning point for the game of where it was going to go. And then Cooper Coates got his third penalty of the game to bring Canada to 37, Namibia 36. Now, at this point, we all thought that the game was over because the clock was in the red. However, as Brian Ray of America's Rugby News pointed out, the referee had called for a stoppage of play and the clock had kept going. So this basically meant there were 4 or 5 minutes of gameplay still left to go that none of us knew about. We're wondering, why is this taking so long? And unfortunately, Canada just were unable to hold Namibia back enough, and Kisting got the try, which gave Namibia their first win over Canada. So, and then just to add salt to the wound, Kisting then nailed his conversion, so it was a full 6-point margin. Again, the final score: Canada 37, Namibia 43. Derek, what did you make of this game?
Yeah, I mean, ended up being a pretty entertaining game. I mean, obviously, you know, Canada seemed to get off to a bit of a fast start. Built up a little bit of a lead. Unfortunately, Namibia able to kind of come back and tie it up at halftime, and then, yeah, a bit of a wild second half. I mean, I think there's both. This is one of those games again where it's like there's both, you know, the positives and the negatives to kind of come through it. I mean, I think we've said a few times on this podcast too over the last, or at least during all the test matches this year, which really there hasn't been too many, but it seems like this is one of those years where it's like the scoreline kind of doesn't feel like it matters as much as, you know, just looking for like the signs of like development and like the team and the individual players getting better, and also maybe like the coaches also developing and, you know, maybe going with some different tactics and things like that. So I guess like on that tactic front, I think, you know, after having the success with ball in hand against the Netherlands in the second half a week ago, they seemed like they wanted to kind of stick with that a lot more during this game, which I think Namibia was also perfectly fine with because they kind of did it too. So a lot of ball in hand. I think, you know, obviously you kind of look at this game, Canada scores 4 tries, which is solid, but I mean, they allowed 7, which obviously is not that great. I think defensively, it's like there's nothing that like glaringly jumped out as like super problematic other than like all the typical issues that you probably have when you lose a rugby game. You know, there's too many missed tackles, of course. There's, you know, there's too many missed tackles, there's too many penalties, and ultimately you gave up too many tries. which
Yeah.
is, that's some real in-depth rugby analysis for any loss that has ever happened in the history of the sport. Right. So it's like you kind of have that, and obviously you do want to fix a lot of those things. In this game, a couple, like, I think, some big positives and stuff. I like the Cooper Coates. We got to give him a shout out over the past couple of games. Flawless. Like, literally, he hasn't missed since forever ago. So I mean, another game here where he's a perfect 7 for 7, which, I mean, realistically, considering Namibia was, and Laubser was kind of missing a couple kicks, and Kitsing missed one as well. Like, Coates being perfect really kept Canada in the game. Especially as you just said, Stu, Canada lost by 6 despite giving up 3 more tries. Right. So like, Coates' ability with the boot really kept him in the game. And I mean, like you kind of said, watching the game with where the clock was at, I think we all thought that he actually won it at the end. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case on the refs' watch. But I think, up front, I think in the forwards, I thought had a pretty solid game. Namibia's got a pretty good pack. It's like one of the better parts of their team that's kind of has, despite the fact that they haven't really had any World Cup success, it is something like I feel like it is a little bit of a better part of their game too. But I think like, I thought like the line out I thought was great. And especially the line out in defense too. Obviously there was a lot of Namibian lineouts that were like overthrown or just straight up botched. But I think there was also a lot that were like, Connor Keys got up and, kind of got a hand on the ball, or got up and, disrupted it in some other way, or, Quatrin, like, obviously, just because it's overthrown, it's like Quatrin's still alert enough to like pick up the loose balls and stuff. He was the first guy to a lot of those. And Canada was really, I thought, defensively at the lineout, Canada did well, and they did pretty well defending a couple of the mauls too. Although obviously a few of them got pushed over for tries. The other side of that, though, was Canada's maul was once again doing pretty well. As Quatrin again had 2 tries in this game. Corey Thomas just seems to score tries whenever he wears a Canada jersey, so that's always nice. All right, so he's picked up another couple, so it's good to kind of see him still being a pretty big threat for this team too. Obviously as well, like my kind of big things in these games, it's cool to see a couple more guys getting some of their first caps, like Owen Rutten, Kyle Steeves getting into the game kind of late. Piers von Dadelson as well got in the game with 18 minutes left, and I thought was pretty good. David Richard came in for Cole late in the game too. Part of it being the developmental thing, kind of disappointed Foster Dewitt didn't get in the game. I know Quatrin was playing really well, but I think part of these games have to be to get those younger guys some cap opportunities. And it is also like, I mean, it's one of those things too, where you look into the future of the team, and, one of the things that really can separate good teams from great teams is, obviously your consistency in your performance, and that consistency, not only just over the course of like a year or something, but over the course of a game as a whole too. And, it didn't work out, but it's like, I kind of like the idea of giving, some guys like Kyle, like, guys like Steeves and Dadelson and Rutten like a chance at the end of the game to try to close it out. Didn't work, but hey, like, that's something that the next generation of Canadian rugby players are going to have to learn how to do, is close out games. It didn't work in this one. Ultimately, like, I think Canada might have been a little hard done by on a lack of scrum penalty called in the, I guess, like 79th minute, but I think on the scoreboard, if you're actually watching the game, probably says like 83 or 84 or something like that. That ultimately gave Namibia, that they didn't get that call, and then on the next scrum, after they reset it, Namibia earned a penalty, and then made a very perplexing choice to kick to the corner. before. I mean, I guess it worked out for them because they did end up scoring a try. But I was still kind of perplexed by that because it was a very makeable kick, I thought, from where that scrum penalty was. But I mean, it does go to show you that, like, there is obviously some work. There's still a lot of work to be done, right?
Yeah.
But I think, you know, I think, like, kind of looking at the last two games, it's ultimately, like, I think it's nice to see a few of the younger players getting a chance. I would maybe like to see them getting a little bit more time in some of these games. But, like, I don't know. I've really liked watching Josiah Mora over the past 2 weeks. I think he's been really good. Injecting some speed, but into the lineup, but also, like, he's done well on, like, kick chases, things like that. It seems to be playing pretty well defensively. Thiel and Lesage, pretty solid 12-13 combination in the middle. So I mean, I think that's been working. Povey, I like Povey a lot more than Peter Nelson. I hope that continues. I know Peter Nelson's hurt, which is why he's not on this team, but I think if Povey keeps playing like that, I think you probably give him the 10 jersey going forward. Coates has obviously been phenomenal from at fullback, but also with the boot. So nice to see some of those guys get. I think Vikalani, I don't think we really talked about it that much, but I thought he was really good against the Netherlands. I thought he kind of carried over a little bit in this game, but maybe didn't have as big of an impact. And then, yeah, like, so it's kind of nice to see a lot of some of those, like younger players kind of getting opportunities to play. I think, as I kind of said earlier, like, I think I'm a little less concerned with the actual results and stuff. Just because I think, like, we got to be using these years to develop guys. And I mean, you're probably going to lose some games that maybe you would prefer to win, but
Yeah.
you gotta, the thing is too, though, it's like you got to put those young guys in these situations where you have to close out a game. And it didn't work today, but, like, that's what you have to build towards, right? And that ability.
Yeah, I think as well it's worth remembering that, with the exception of the, like, under-20s tournament that happened this summer, there hasn't been any developmental opportunities, or as many developmental opportunities, I should say. Yes, there were an under-19s tournament in Amsterdam this summer as well, but these are the places where, if COVID hadn't happened, this would have been opportunities that have been happening for, like, the past few years to get younger players the opportunity to experience international rugby, even at, like, a lower age grade, so that when it comes to the national team, or the senior men's team, I should say, they're there and they're able to go. And that just hasn't happened. So I agree with you where it's coming from. You obviously you want to win every game you're up against, and and also to mention that the games that Canada did play in, like, 2021 before the World Cup qualifications were against England and Wales, two of the top 10 teams in the world, with
and they got
all players in a year-long tournament that has them in the right conditioning for international rugby. And it's just carry on.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I think too, like, I think a key thing to remember, like, if you're kind of evaluating this game, is, like, this is not the best Team Canada that you can put forward.
No.
Right. And it's like, there's obviously, like, a handful of there's a handful of MLR players that aren't on this squad right now. There's obviously the ongoing issue of where are all the European-based guys, which is, obviously that's just an ongoing issue with this team that never seems to get answered. Right. And like, you could probably, like, on paper, you can probably put together a better Team Canada than this. I think right now, like, I'm happy to see a version of Team Canada where it's like, yeah, let's play a bunch of younger guys. I always keep forgetting that Robbie Povey is way younger than I actually think he is for some reason. I don't know why, but it's like I've been liking him at 10. And it's like Andrew Coe too. We haven't really talked about him too much. Man, that guy looks like he's got some like superstar potential. In
Yeah.
him, and it's nice to see him re-signing with the champs as well. Him and Quinn Nawadi back. Quinn Nawadi, speaking of which, another player that's not on this squad right now. So it's like there's definitely players that are available to Canada that aren't on this team, but I think that's kind of what you want to be doing though, is giving these younger players chances to try their hand at um international rugby. And like what happened to Kyle Steeves and Owen Rutten in this game is like kind of get thrown into the fire of like a really big situation at the end of the game and see how you go. Right. And who knows what's going to happen next year. Believe Kingsley Jones's contract still goes through the end of what would be the end of the World Cup. So I mean, there's still that that's kind of lingering there. Right. So, it'll be interesting to see like what kind of test matches Canada gets as a whole lot of other countries are preparing for the World Cup. Will be interesting to see what kind of competition, what kind of test matches Canada can get during next year as well. Right. I think we'll get into a little bit of USA, Portugal later. But like it'd be nice to see like an ARC, something to that effect, come back. Which would probably benefit both our countries, to be honest.
Yeah.
Right. Like it'd be nice to so I mean, like I don't know what the future of the competition and stuff's gonna be, but I do know that no matter who Canada ends up playing next year, like we gotta keep kind of getting some of these young guys some experience and stuff. So we got to find a way, much like what we've been saying with the women's team, like the men's team also needs more games.
Yeah.
Right.
Like again, it does seem to be a thing of like they would have had more games if there hadn't been a global pandemic. But you make do with what you've got.
That's still but I mean the other thing is like how long can we use the pandemic as an excuse for, right? Like that's
we are quickly running out of time to keep using that.
But it's like I don't know. I think ultimately though, I mean, like there's still stuff. The last two games, even lose, like there's still like those tiny things that you see every now and then that kind of gives you hope that the team is slightly trending in an upward direction, right? And hopefully it going into next year it'll just keeps getting better. Younger guys, maybe we get some more players in MLR. It seems like there's a few more guys signing in MLR this year. I guess when we hit like January or so, we'll probably know a little bit closer to what the actual number is going to be. But I don't know. It feels like there's more Canadians signing in the league this year, right? And especially as we'll get into some Arrow signings and stuff, but we're finding more Canadian eligible guys to come over too. So that's always good.
Yeah. So the men's team conclude their 2022 season with 2 wins over Belgium and the Netherlands and 2 losses, which is Spain and Namibia. As you said, nothing's been announced of any test matches in the foreseeable future or any dates given for 2023. Obviously, Canada aren't in the Men's Rugby World Cup, but there may be an opportunity to be part of the warm-up games that will take place in August. Now we quickly move from the men's 15s to the men's 7s because this press release came out earlier today. We are recording on Tuesday, the 22nd of November, and it is that Rugby Canada has agreed to release the men's 7s head coach, Henry Paul, from his contract with immediate effect. So this comes out and it says, Paul started his tenure back in 2018 as defensive coach for the men's national team that earned qualification for the 2019 Men's Rugby World Cup. He later took the helm of the men's 7s program, leading the team to a bronze medal in the HSBC World Rugby 7 Series in 2020, an 8th place finish at the Tokyo Olympics in 2021, and later to the quarterfinals of the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham earlier this year. Paul has said, I'm really proud of my time here in Canada. I've worked with some incredible colleagues and coached some world-class players, experienced too many incredible moments to mention, the ones that I will always cherish. Now is the right time for me to focus on my family and the next challenge in my career. The future is bright for this young, developing side, and I look forward to watching the game we all love continue to flourish in Canada. Assistant coach Sean White will lead the men's team as they depart for back-to-back HSBC series stops in Dubai and Cape Town. And the new Rugby Canada CEO Nathan Brombis said, we would like to thank Henry for his service and commitment to our national teams in 7s and 15s. Coaching Canada into the Olympic quarterfinals was a highlight of his time with us. We wish Henry and his family all the best for the future. We are excited about what Sean can bring to the squad and look forward to watching him develop the team over the next 2 tournaments. Now, that all seems fine and dandy when we're talking about, obviously, it is a press release. It's going to be as official as possible. And this news broke over Twitter. And so you go there and we see this being quote tweeted by a certain Mr. Andrew Coe.
Superstar, as I just mentioned.
Indeed. And Andrew maybe has some, how do I put this, like differing opinions.
He's got some thoughts.
Different thoughts, let's put it like that. Andrew Coe said a massive that Henry Paul stepping down is a massive win for the Sevens program. Excited to see where this program can go with better coaching and leadership.
Damn, that's an all-time tweet right there, man.
Yeah.
That is
yeah, and come on, Andrew, just tell us how you feel. Crikey.
No, actually, honestly, I kind of love it. I mean, hey, we're all, I mean, it's no surprise. It's like, we're all thinking it. I mean, if you just click on the original Rugby Canada tweet and read those comments, pretty clear that a lot of Canadian rugby fans don't exactly think he's the only one that should be going.
Yes,
that's pretty clear.
Now, obviously, whenever you see something come out on social media, there's a tendency to look at the comments, and everyone will tell you, just don't. You need to preserve your mental health somehow. So that's what to do. But the key thing over, well, especially on Twitter, appears to be that they're saying, there should be a men's head coach who's not in the Sevens that should be able to go. The sentiment seems to be continuing over on Instagram as well.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, that sentiment I think has been on every single Rugby Canada post for the past year and a half by this point, whether they're announcing something important or just mentioning that there's a sale on Rugby Canada coffee mugs happening on their website right now. But I think it's I think, we all knew the high performance review came out and stuff, and everybody's been saying that it's the organization needs some changes and some changes in the coaching staff and stuff, right? And I mean, weirdly, it was the women's 15s team got a coaching change earlier this year, right? And I guess it does kind of feel like it's a matter of time for these changes to be happening. But yeah, it is one of those things though where it's obviously Andrew Coe has played for the Sevens team, and it is hilarious seeing the tweet go up in basically pretty immediately after Rugby Canada's, because it's we know that there's a bit of a culture issue in Rugby Canada, and it is interesting to see players openly celebrating a coach being let go on social media. Absolutely, that's an all-time tweet. It's and the thing is though is I'm not disagreeing with this tweet, so I hope it doesn't come across by that, but it does highlight that there's a lot of changes that do need to happen at Rugby Canada. This is probably one of them. So best of luck though to Sean White, man. I think at the end of the day, as much as we all are calling for changes at Rugby Canada, we do all want Rugby Canada to succeed as well. So Sean White getting promoted, best of luck to him as the 7 series continues. as Andrew Coe said, excited to see where the program can go with better coaching and leadership. So, hopefully that's Sean White, and we'll get to see the program on the rise again. I think that they struggled a little bit earlier in the year too, but it's hopefully, much like the 15s team, it's get some new guys in, rebuild the team, and kind of we're on to a new generation of sevens players too. It's not just the 15s team.
Yeah.
God damn, it's a good tweet though.
Yeah. Well, like I say, we've talked about it, and especially when the high performance review came out, it's clearly indicative that there needs to be wholesale change at Rugby Canada if they want to continue. So, it's going to start small, and at least by
I wouldn't necessarily say getting rid of or letting go the coach of a national team is necessarily small, but
that's what that's what I mean. As in, instead of saying like every single coach is fired, every member of the executive is gone, we have to do it like bit by bit by bit by bit. And if you're gonna agree with Andrew Coe, then this seems to be a step in the right direction, and this can be part of the gradual change that does eventually come back around to benefit Rugby Canada. Now, speaking of Rugby Canada, we move away from the men's. We're focusing on the women because it was the World Rugby Awards on Sunday. And unfortunately, there are two downers that happened. For example, Abby Dow won women's try of the year, which was against Canada. So we got to see that happen again, which was delightful. Yes. And there was a bit of a spelling error when it came to the Women's World Player of the Year, because they misspelled Sophie de Goede and Canada. And and I think, it's one of these like communication issues. It just got lost in translation.
They even actually physically gave the award to somebody else. It was bizarre.
I know it's just the height of incompetence. I do not know what's going on there, but I've got a strongly worded letter being sent over. However, Sophie de Goede and Emily Totosi were both named in World Rugby's Women's 15 of the Year. And, they were present there to receive their interesting coloured World 15's kit, which was,
that's a design, yeah. It's also, though, like, it's cool because the other cool thing, though, is that, like, Heather Moyse, Canadian World Rugby Hall of Famer, actually presented them with the jerseys. So there's a bit of some added Canadian content at this award ceremony. So that was really cool to see too.
Yeah, that's cool. Absolutely. So the total awards, Women's Try of the Year went to Abby Dow. Men's Try of the Year went to Rodrigo Fernandez of Chile. The Special Merit Award went to Brian Habana. The Vernon Pugh Award for Distinguished Service went to Farah Palmer. The Referee Award went to Tape Henning from South Africa. Women's Seven Player of the Year was Charlotte Koslick from Australia. The Men's Sevens Player was Terry Kennedy. Women's Breakthrough Player of the Year was Ruby Tui. Men's 15s Breakthrough Player of the Year was Angie Capuzzo. Men's Coach of the Year, the Coach of the Year was Wayne Smith, the Black Ferns coach. Women's 15s Player of the Year. Now, I still think it was Sophie de Goede, but apparently is Rehe de Mont from New Zealand, and the men's 15th player of the year was Josh van der Fleer of Ireland. So congratulations to all recipients, and congratulations to the recipients of the Dream Team of the Year for both men's and women's 15. Right. While we're speaking on international rugby basis and world rugby, we have to talk about the game that decided the 20th and final entrant for the 2023 Rugby World Cup. So USA and Portugal went into this game on equal points. However, on point difference, Portugal led. So all they need to do was at least draw, and that's without taking try bonus points into the equation. USA absolutely needed to win. And now this game was on quite early because obviously it was played in Dubai, so the time difference, I think it was it was an early kickoff for the USA and Portugal.
Yeah.
And So I think it's like 9 a.m., 10 a.m.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of unfortunate too. Like I think before even getting into the game itself, it's one of those things where it's like we want to grow the game of rugby in like in this part of the world. Like obviously World Rugby seems to be somewhat invested in it because they gave the USA a World Cup in 9 years. So maybe like play this game on a Saturday. Like I'm not saying it could have. I'm not saying it had to be later in the day or anything because time zones are obviously a thing.
Yeah, I think that was the main issue with it because not only is it like an awkward time for like Americans to wanting to watch this game, but when you think about it, you're looking at the teams that were in the like final qualification tournament. So that is Kenya, United States, Portugal, and Hong Kong. For Hong Kong, this was also a very difficult time to watch the game. It benefited Kenya and Portugal the most, I would say.
And it's just because they're closer, but
yeah, exactly. Like, and I
wake up on a Saturday to watch it, but it's like it's in the middle of the workday for like probably. I mean, I don't know. Maybe Portugal does things differently, but I'm assuming it's in the middle of their workday too. Right.
Well, I don't know. I'd say that to me, I'm surprised that this tournament wasn't held in France because then you could at least have the argument of like, oh, it's being held in the host country.
Well,
and therefore it's whichever team qualifies. This is the timeframes that you should start to familiarize yourself with. But I'm not a member of World Rugby. I'm not the one deciding when.
The stadium didn't exactly look full for a lot of these games.
It is. It's a 7 stadium, and it's only really used 4 of the 7s. But money talks.
Yeah.
So we get to the final draw comes up. Hong Kong and Kenya have both lost their games against the United States and Portugal, respectively. So it just is a dead rubber between Hong Kong and Kenya. That's the first game. And then we move on to the game of the United States versus Portugal. And yeah, it was a interesting and so AJ McGinty gets the scoring started, and then there's not long after a yellow card for Nate Augsburger, and then Portugal get their first try of the game and a conversion to take the lead. Then we get to like the 22nd minute where Jose Lima gets his yellow card, so now the Americans are up a player. And AJ McGinty takes the penalty from that point. They're unable to add any further points in that time frame. So then McGinty gets another penalty or misses another penalty in the 31st minute to leave the score at 6-7. Portugal then get a penalty just before halftime, and then right on the stroke of halftime, McGinty gets another penalty to make the halftime score 9-10. From the second half, Portugal missed 2 penalties, score 1 to lead 9-13. Then Capelli Pifoletti scores a try with McGinty converting to give the USA a narrow lead. Portugal get another yellow card in the 60th minute. Again, the United States are unable to score in those 10 minutes until finally we get into the very end of the game. I believe it was like the United States had like a line out, and that just went to pot. And eventually Portugal keep attacking and attacking and attacking.
No, it was McGinty kicked it into the corner. It was a Portugal line out, but it was at 5 meters out from Portugal's line.
Oh yes, sorry. I'm just used to seeing balls get kicked into the corner, and it's gonna be whoever kicked it out. However, yes, you're right. It was a Portugal line out. Portugal then turned the attack and kept pushing and pushing and pushing, and eventually the clock's in the red, but the ref's arm has gone out, and they are within kicking distance. Now, they almost didn't need it. They did go for the drop goal, but it hit the post, and so as such, it went back for the penalty where Samuel Marquez stepped up. and kicked the ball over Portugal in ecstasy and the USA in heartbreak, as Portugal got the draw of 16 all, and on points difference, they are the final team to qualify for the Rugby World Cup to be held next year in France. So congratulations to them. Let's look at the pool that they'll be in. They'll be facing Georgia. You know, they've had a few encounters with them during, you know, the Rugby Europe Championship. Fiji as well. I don't know if this will be like the first time that Fiji and Portugal have met. Well, definitely it will be the first in a long time at the World Cup. Then they face Wales and Australia.
Well, Wales isn't any good, so.
No, that's true. But Australia, they can.
Well,
as long as they kick the penalty in time, then it can be pretty threatening. But so I mean, whichever team qualifies through like the final qualification tournament,
that's
like no matter how you look at it, it's going to be
that's what you get for being the last team to qualify. You get a
you should have got in it the first chance. You should have go. It does feel weird as like it's like, okay, we've lost to Georgia this many times, and we've lost to these other teams. We've beaten all these other teams. Who do we face? Georgia.
All these teams, yeah. It is one of those things where it's like, sometimes you do see like these qualification tournaments, and you're like, congratulations, you get to go 0-4 at the World Cup. But
I mean, obviously, the monetary benefits outweigh
exactly
the score
certainly, certainly, I would much rather go 0-4 at the. See, we're only mocking this to hide our pain.
Yes.
That's it. We're mocking this to hide our pain. Portugal, congratulations.
So we want to say to any Eagles fans who are heartbroken that their team hasn't been able to qualify for the World Cup first time.
Yeah. It's actually not their first time. It's our first.
It's not their first time. It's their first time recently.
Technically.
Like we have had a year's head start.
Yeah.
It'll be okay in the end, but for now, have that extra drink, have that long cry.
Yeah,
it'll be okay.
Maybe.
I hope.
Maybe. Yeah, we'll see what happens. We're still talking about Canada making changes. I think though, like the one thing that it's like, I think looking at this game, obviously it is interesting to see our American friends kind of going through the same conversations and stuff that we've been doing for the past like year. On this podcast, and obviously it's a tough day for rugby in North America, as obviously we all want to see the game grow. What have you thought of the reaction, Stu? Because I think there's a couple just to, like the reaction in general to the USA not making it, because I think there's a couple things that kind of jumped out at me online, but I kind of want to hear your opinion first.
It does seem as though I've heard these conversations before. Lack of a better thing, of like, Gary Gold needs to step down.
That's one.
The administrators and the executive of USA Rugby need to step down. They need to change. World Rugby needs to change. Not World Rugby. USA Rugby needs to change their focus. They need to do this and that. If we'd had the ARC, the USA wouldn't be in the same position. Well, I think that's different from Canada, because I think the USA took the America's Rugby Championship far more seriously than Canada did.
I think the ARC is a big deal, and we need it's just more international games, right? Like I think that's it's unfortunate, but I think that had an impact.
These aren't. I think one of the big things that will probably come out from this, and it's been highlighted. It's been highlighted for a few tournaments, so this isn't relatively new. But I think it's like Chile is the only new union to be going to the World Cup this year. So, as in Portugal have, they previously
they've played
competed in 2007.
Oh, okay.
Um,
In a while. Sorry.
and they said Russia's not played. Well, Russia got removed due to the invasion of
For Chile,
Ukraine.
deserves it. So sorry, I was going to say. I think one of the things that I think I've seen kind of jump out at me. Yeah, like what you mentioned as far as like Gary Gold, and I mean honestly it's a lot of the same things that I think we were yelling about Rugby Canada.
Yeah.
The one thing though I've kind of seen that's popped up a few times that I thought was really interesting, but I don't quite understand it, is like the MLR and the relationship to the fact that Canada and the USA are both not in the World Cup.
I've said this before and I'll say it again. Improving the men's national team is a benefit from MLR. It is not the goal.
Yeah, like so. I think my whole thing is with this. I've been kind of thinking about this one, and I think like the MLR is obviously separate from Rugby Canada and USA Rugby, despite the fact that they play rugby. And obviously, there's a lot of in those countries, and there's obviously a lot of crossover in the actual athletes themselves. But I think, like, I don't know. I think seeing the USA get knocked out of the World Cup too, I think we might need to have like a little bit of like a chicken or the egg kind of conversation, right? Like the whole idea of what comes first, right? And in this sense, I kind of mean like, do we think that national team success, the Eagles, Canada, national team success is going to lead to an increase in popularity of rugby on our continent, or is an increase in popularity of rugby on our continent going to eventually lead to national team success? And like, I've been kind of thinking about this, and I really think it's the latter. I think, you know what I mean? Because I think, like, people I've seen, there's posts on Reddit talking about like if this makes the MLR look bad, and there's people arguing about it in like the thread, as people do on all social media. And it's like, I think like the MLR is only 6 years old, right?
Yeah.
And like, I think, I'm trying to like compare things, and I don't even know if these are the best comparisons, but you look at some other sports and other national teams around other sports, and I'm going to maybe kind of use a little bit of a smaller scale here, but currently in the NBA, there is a record number of Canadians in the NBA. There's 23 Canadians in the NBA right now. Between 1947 and 1995, there was only 12 Canadians that suited up in the NBA. Over that entire stretch, there's almost double that playing this season, right? And what's the biggest difference between prior to 1995 and post 1995? The Toronto Raptors, right? And to a smaller extent, I'll give a little shout out to the Vancouver Grizzlies too. They existed for a period of time. Right. They did. And Steve Nash, MVP, right? That was always fun to watch as a Canadian kid. But like, there's a documentary on Netflix called The Carter Effect, which is great. If you haven't watched it, I would recommend watching it. But it's basically about how the fact that Vince Carter was half man, half amazing is like one of the maybe sole driving factors to the growth of popularity of basketball in Canada, because all these kids decide to pick up a basketball because they watch Vince Carter and the Toronto Raptors. Right. And you can kind of see that now by the fact that there's a lot of Canadians in the NBA. Similarly, right, I'll stick with Toronto. Toronto has one of the star players on Toronto's hockey team is famously from Arizona, right? And he is a player that credits the existence of the Coyotes as, a reason that he got into hockey, right? And there's also Buffalo Sabres Tage Thompson right now is also from Arizona. They're around the same age. And they, like, if you kind of look at that, the Arizona Coyotes played their first game in Arizona in 1996, right? It took 20 years for Tage Thompson and Austin Matthews to show up in the NHL, right?
Yeah.
Similarly, for those NBA players, it took 20 years, right? It took 20 years for that to happen, for these guys to end up in the NBA. These guys that grew up watching Vince Carter and the Toronto Raptors, it's taken them 20 years before we're like hitting record numbers of Canadians in the NBA. Similarly, as we touched on at the start of the podcast, right? Toronto FC made their MLS debut in 2007. It took 15 years for the Canadian men's national team to get back to the World Cup, which they're playing. They're playing their first World Cup game since the 80s this week. We don't know the result of it right now. By the time you're listening, you will. But there's 11 players on the Canadian national team that play in MLS. Right? There's obviously more MLS teams than just TFC, but like that's the impact. And I think like you're looking at this, and I'm thinking like the MLR, I think, is going to be that driving factor in doing something like increasing and growing the game in these regions that these MLR teams are currently located in, right? And you know what I mean? Like Alex Magleby of the Free Jacks sent out a tweet after the loss that essentially said this. Meanwhile, 528 elementary school kids picked up a rugby ball for the first time over the last 5 days in Greater Boston. 951,727 still get to in New England. That's a lot of kids. That is a like good job, Free Jacks. That is an absurd amount of kids. But the thing is, though, the one thing that you got to highlight in this sentence, right, is elementary school kids. So those kids that are picking up these rugby balls, I don't know the exact details of what the program that Magleby is specifically referring to here, but just off the term elementary school kids, like we're talking kids that are what, between the age of 6 and 14, right? So right. So we're talking probably what, minimum 10 to 15 years before any of those kids are Eagles.
Yeah.
And it's like you look at that and you kind of go, okay, so you got like over 900,000 kids picking up a rugby ball. Sure, not all of them are going to fall in love with rugby. That's going to be absurd to suggest, but some of them will, right? Some of them might actually be really good at it too, right? But either way, though, like that's the thing. It's like those kids are now, if they try rugby at their school, fall in love with it, decide, tell their parents to be like, let's like take me to the Free Jacks game on Saturday, right? And then that helps to grow the game, right? And I think like that's where I think the real impact on for the MLR is. Like I think there's a lot of people that I think we're looking at whether the Canadian national team and the US national team have success because, all the players get to play in MLR now. But it's like the reality, I think, is that the biggest impact that the MLR has on players, I don't think is going to be on guys like Bryce Campbell or Cam Dolan or Lucas Rumball or Ben Lesage. I think the biggest impact that the MLR is going to have on the US and Canadian national team isn't on those guys, despite the fact that they play in MLR and are obviously being impacted by it. But the biggest impact isn't going to be those players or any of the players that are already currently in MLR. The biggest impact is going to be on the 10-year-old kid that goes to the Chicago Hounds home opener and gets Bryce Campbell's autograph, falls in love with rugby, and then hopefully actually becomes good at it, right? Or similarly to that same, that 8-year-old that does the same thing in Toronto with Lucas Rumball, or pick any other team in the league and be like, that kid that we'll go with this elementary school age, that 6 to 14-year-old kid that falls in love with the game because they can go to MLR games. Those players, that's where the league is going to have the biggest impact. And it's like, if you look at all of that, it's like these kids that you really want to impact now, right? Those elementary school aged kids, maybe like early high school age kids, right? Like those are the ones that you want to impact. That's the ones you want to put the MLR in front of. That's like, you don't like, it's not going to be Cam Dolan that benefits the most from the MLR. It's going to be the kid that has the Cam Dolan poster on his wall right now.
Yeah.
That's going to eventually grow up and be able to play, like, because you're kind of looking at, like, look at these like generation gaps and stuff, right? It's like we talked about all the, like, these NBA players, right? And it's like the group of NBA players right now are the first generation of kids that got to grow up with the NBA in Canada. Right. But it takes 20 years for that to happen. Right. And similarly, it's going to take like you're kind of looking at like the USA World Cup. Right.
Yeah.
That's probably enough time for like that grade 8 kid that's like 13, 14 to become an Eagle.
Yeah.
Right. By the time that comes around.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that I remember Bill Webb. I think this would have been back in like 2019. So, and it was the Arrows end of year review of how things have gone, because obviously some of the guys had gone to the World Cup, and he had been asked how come that Canada had done so badly at the World Cup considering the Arrows were around. To which his response was, "It's not even been a year. They've just been around for a few months at this point." And that is exactly the point. I think people are expecting mountains when all we have are molehills at the moment. Like, they're expecting that earth and heavens to move just because we have MLR. It's not enough, it's going to take time. Everything is going to take time. I think the only thing I can add on, like, on top of what you say, which I completely agree with, is that the structure of rugby progression has to improve. It has to be.
I am by no means saying that this is perfect.
No, but you are explaining. I do agree, like, explaining that is that when a kid goes to their local rugby club for like open day of learning how to become a rugby player, and like, these are the skills you need to learn, this is like how you pass the ball and things like that, the very basics. Even by that point, they should be able to see a clear line of how they go from joining that club to playing for the national team. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they will all make the national team, but if you say, like, a kid was to go along to Balmy Beach Rugby Club and be like, okay, from there, where do you go with Rugby Ontario? Where does Rugby Ontario then take you to national level? And it's like, there's the under-19s, there's the under-21s, there's obviously the senior team, there's the sevens team as well.
Yeah.
And this is something that, was brought up in the high performance review. We're going to keep coming back to it until it's done. We're going to keep mentioning it
until it's fixed. Sorry, I'll finish up. Sorry.
So as in, I think, and I'm not saying, we have to be like, for you to get from this level to this level to this level, it's going to cost you this amount of hours of your time. It's going to cost like £1,000. £1,000. Sorry, went a bit too British then. Going to cost thousands of dollars over these many years.
So that's like $10,000, £1,000.
Exactly. Well, actually, if you had done it while Liz Truss was in power, maybe it would have been half that amount. But the point I'm making is,
let's do it.
One of the points I'm making is that, for the women's development, is that they got rid of like the pay to play structure. Now, I'm not saying that rugby is the only sport which is pay to play, because obviously there is a very serious issue when it comes to like hockey in Canada of how much money
when it comes to hockey in Canada.
There's a few issues, but there is a few, here and there. But obviously to relate back to rugby is that people are saying that it's becoming more and more expensive to send their kids to like hockey camps to get the right equipment, to get all these kind of things. And this is for a sport which is so culturally included in, it's part of every Canadian's blood, essentially. There's a team that you follow. If it's not an NHL team that you follow, maybe it's an OHL team or a AHL team, or even your local team. That's what you follow, and they have a money issue when it comes to developing the next generation of players. So just imagine what it's like for a niche sport to be in that same position. And we are doing this from a Canadian perspective, where this is a Canadian rugby podcast of all, but for like the Americans watching, I have no idea what their pathway is. I know there have been issues, obviously.
I feel like there's been a lot of chatter
rugby
about the college system being a little messed up the last couple of years or something. But
actually, that was a comment that was mentioned, is that a lot of people have issues with like NCAA, but if you make rugby an NCAA sport, then it suddenly becomes viewable to an entire new market. And
it's not even an official, the men's rugby is not an official youth sport either.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's something that should be campaigned on. That should be
women's
something
rugby,
women's rugby is.
Yeah.
And so it's getting hard. I think from that perspective, if you can say, well, if women's rugby is okay, then why is it men's rugby?
It's because women's sport needed something to balance off football, and that's what the youth sports did.
Yeah, that's
stupid thing. Yes, yeah, but... agreed. I mean, I think people are trying to change that. I think, though, with part of what you were saying there, with that, you're talking about like the pathway, right? And like, even hockey, it's like, even if there is issues there or whatever, the hockey's got a very clear pathway in this country, right? And I think, what I liked, kind of liked your example, right? You're talking about, when you were saying your point there, you kind of formed a little bit of a story about like a kid going to Balmy Beach and then, trying to work their way up to the MLR. Yeah. Right. And that's the thing though, right? Is like that alone shows you that this is going to take time, because it's like, the reality is it's like none of the players that currently play in MLR dreamed about playing in MLR when they were kids, because the MLR did not exist. Yeah. Right. And
actually, that's something I was meant to mention and then lost track.
Okay. See,
one thing that the MLR has done, which will be of huge benefit going down, is the introduction of different levels of academies. You have like senior academies, you have youth academies, you have age grade academies, and yes, the teams are doing this because they do get an increased salary cap as a result. But if you have like age grade kids coming in and playing for like the Arrows youth academy and stuff like that, they then have more opportunities to see how the pathway is going. This is something that the current Arrow senior players never had.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and that's the thing. Even if it's a case of this player goes through like the Arrows academy system, goes to like UBC, for example, and then gets picked up by an American MLR team, or is even really fortunate and gets picked up by a European or New Zealand or Australian team, and then gets put in that professional environment and still is able to play for Canada. That is so much legwork that has been covered that was not available even 5 years ago.
No, exactly. I think, like I said, I think that's where the MLR is gonna, like, that's where I think the MLR's biggest impact is gonna be felt, right? Like, the reality is like a lot of the guys that are on the Canadian and American national teams at the moment, a lot of them got their first, a lot of them, not all of them obviously, but a lot of them got their first caps before the MLR was even a thing. Right? And a lot of those guys, there's a lot of guys that had lengthy, had lengthy careers before MLR was a thing too, right? But like the path, I think that's exactly it though. And it's like, I'm like, trying to use these examples of other sports just to be like, like it takes time, right? And you know what I mean? Like it's if you're willing to put it in, like it is cool looking at like NHL player birthplaces and seeing like California, Arizona, Florida, Texas, right, all popping up, because it wasn't of that, those are not common places before the 90s, right?
Yeah.
And similarly, as as I highlighted, there's a lot more Canadian NBA players than there was in 1994, right? And like, you have to kind of expose people to the sport. And I like, that's where I think the biggest impact is going to be felt by the MLR. Like you kind of said, that comment on, like, it's like it's only been a year or whatever with both, like, a while ago, it's like it's only been a year with both USA and Canada performances at the 2019 World Cup. But it's like, I feel like you can still say that, like, it's only been 6 years, right?
Yeah.
And like, one of those 6 years, I guess, was wiped out by a pandemic too. Um,
Yeah.
but like, it's only been like it's only been 6 years, and it's like, I feel like the MLR, and like their owners, it's like if you're building a house, right? It's like the
Yeah.
MLR owners right now have, like, they've poured a foundation,
Yeah.
and now it rained, and we're
Yeah.
all like, this house sucks. There's no why is the floor wet? And it's just
Yeah.
like, oh, we haven't finished building the house yet. Um,
Yeah.
right. And it's like, it'll be it like, when it rains, when the house is built, it's not gonna, like, get the couch wet and stuff.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, and that's not to say that, like, the MLR is perfect, or there's not things that the league can improve, because there certainly is.
Yeah.
Right. I just think it's like, I don't know. I guess it was like, I guess, seeing the comments on, like, if it makes the MLR look bad, I'm kind of like, I think they're separate, but it's also I mean, I guess on one hand, imagine what these teams look like without MLR.
Yeah.
Is, like, I guess, another way to look at it. But it's like, this league's in like super early days, and it's like,
Yeah.
it's going to take time, and it's like, that's why, though, I really think, like, going back to my initial thing, like the chicken or the egg, like,
Yeah.
national team success leads to popularity, or popularity leads to national team success. And it's like, that's why, like, I kind of think it's probably popularity.
Yeah.
Because, like, the MLR, if you get good marketing, you get owners that care, you get coaches that care, you get players that care, you get those international players that also care and want to be a part of growing the game in North America. If you get, right, guys that care, going to camps, right, doing, like, going to camps, doing, like, rugby days in schools, or, like, going to, like, other community events, or any whatever each of the 12 teams deem the best way to market their team and their brand in the city, that their respective cities. Right. It's like, it's like all those people doing that and working towards that, if you increase that popularity, the impact is going to be felt on, like, a next generation of people that get to fall in love with rugby, and then are hopefully really good at it.
Yeah.
But right, you know what I mean? And it's like, even something, I think, like the American Raptors, which is like, obviously they've been, running their program, and it's like they've been having some success. A couple players graduating the MLR. And it's like, there's a small part of me, though, that's like, no matter how good one of those Raptors ends up being, right? Those former football players, the former basketball players, the former wrestlers,
Yeah.
former whatever other athletes, no matter how good that Raptor ends up being, I feel like there's always going to be that small part in the back of my mind. It's going to be like, imagine if you started playing rugby at 14 instead of 24.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, and I think, like, that's the thing. It's like, it's not good. Like, the switch, we have to put in the work. It's like, we got to start improving these teams. We got to start improving the way Rugby Canada's run, USA Rugby's run, which is completely separate in my mind from the MLR. But you got to, like, by doing that, I think that's where, like, you have to grow the game in popularity and bring it to inspire the next generation of kids, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's a reason why, like, Vince Carter jerseys still sell in Toronto.
Yeah.
Right? Is like, that's why so many kids my age, people my age, I just called myself a kid, that was weird. People my age love basketballs because of Vince Carter. Right.
Yeah.
And still shows. And it's like, you want the way we feel about Vince Carter to be the way that kids feel about Bryce Campbell, Cam Dolan, Lucas Rumball, Ben Lesage, Cole Keith, whoever else you want to add to this list of the American and Canadian national team players, right? That's what you want to create. And I think that's where the all right. And I think if you do that, the Eagles and Canada's national team in 10 to 15 years, right? Which is, I think, a slightly important thing. And it might be too slow for some people, but like 10 to 15, much like the men's soccer team that took 10 years. It took 15 years. It's like, it's a process, but like, you got to grow the popularity. I think you have to grow the popularity through marketing and these initiatives before the national teams. And then the national teams will benefit from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, one thing to mention, because you slightly brought it up in when you were talking about growing the game, is that we finally have our 12th team announced, and it is the Chicago Hounds. So there was a small 30-minute press release that's still available on Facebook, which revealed the name and logo of the expansion side, and featured the general manager, James English, explained the choices, saying, it's a hound's head, embodies the spirit of Chicago with strength, guts, and ferocity. The six-pointed star pays homage to the Chicago flag and our city's storied history. And the color scheme of green, white, and blue stand proudly for Chicago and our Irish roots. And the blue converging lines are inspired by the Chicago River as it merges, you see behind in today. Two of the team's ownership group, which include Phil Groves and Matthew Thatchell, spoke at the event along with their new head coach, Sam Harris. So he's staying in MLR, moving now to the new Chicago team. And we also have the first signings announced, which includes Bryce Campbell. However, it was also the players that were also there were Mike Matarazzo, Sidney Shoup, and Caleb Strum. What do you think of the Chicago Hounds logo?
My first reaction to it was it looks like they play in Winterfell. That kind of immediate Game of Thrones vibes. It looks very much, to me anyways, the hound in the middle looks very much like a Game of Thrones sigil to me, which, by the way, I am absolutely not saying is a bad thing. I actually really like the logo. It does. I think it's also the fact that the team's called the Hounds, which is a Game of Thrones. I'm just getting all around Game of Thrones from this logo, which is a good thing. I do like some of those touches that they put in. I do think it's cool when it's a big trend, I think, in sport logo design right now, to make sure that every line means something somewhat important. So kind of cool to see Chicago adding in some of those details. I like the green and blue colors. It looks good. I think Sam Harris being the coach, this makes so much sense. Just because obviously, I mean, he's the coach of Austin, and Austin is going to make up a good chunk of this team, mixed in with some obviously guys from LA and a couple guys sprinkled in from other parts of the league. But how do you not go with this? Like, if you're going to end up with a lot of the Austin players, like, why not go out and grab the coach that took them from an 0-16 team to, barring a disqualification, a serious shield threat? Right. And it makes all the sense in the world to me to hire him to be the coach. Nice to see a couple big name players. Bryce Campbell, obviously, big, very prominent player on the USA national team, right? So nice to see him already signing with the Hounds. And man, I thought the logo looked nice branding. The coach makes all the sense in the world. Ownership group is cool. James English obviously involved in Rooney earlier, which is probably a good thing, man. I think perhaps some lessons learned from Adam Gilchrist, that you gotta maybe look for owners that kind of are going to align well within the league and the direction that the league wants to go. So I think maybe a good way of doing that is to go out and get somebody that's already been an owner in the league, right? So to help out with that group. So overall, kind of like the I don't know, I got a pretty good first impression of the Chicago Hounds. I like the name, like the logo, like a couple of their first signings, like the coach. So
yeah,
pretty positive.
I think the only issues I have is one, while they do have like social media pages, they don't have a website set up, which is kind of disappointing.
Yeah.
Also, I feel that this announcement should have come before the schedule release.
So that they could be on the schedule.
Yeah, so that they could actually have their colors and logo present.
Circling back to the MLR is not perfect, but I think
yes, exactly.
This conversation from 2 minutes ago.
Yeah. So also mentioned that the team will be playing at SeatGeek Stadium, which is a 20,000 capacity facility. You may also know it as Toyota Park, as the previous home of Chicago Fire in MLS. They will play their first regular season game on the road against Old Glory DC on February 18th. They'll have their home opener against Utah Warriors on March the 4th. And then the following week, they will be playing the Toronto Arrows. So all those dates I just gave you are for 2023, but there is still the opportunity to watch rugby in 2022. We have the final 2 games of the Autumn Nations series, which will be England versus South Africa and Wales versus Australia. Those will be available on DAZN. And we have the return of the Premiership and URC, and both will be available on Sportsnet. But if you like listening to this podcast and would like to listen to more, you can do so on Spotify, Anchor FM, or Apple Podcasts. And if you like watching our content, then you can do so on our YouTube channel, which is at the Rouge Rugby. And in fact, you can follow us on all social media platforms, including Facebook, Twitter, while it's still around, Instagram, and TikTok, again, at the Rouge Rugby. Derek, where can the fine people find you on social media?
Yeah, I'm at Brissette the Jet across all social media platforms. And who knows, maybe, looking for some new homes, I guess, depending on... Thanks, Elon. Thanks. Screwing up the thing that MLR fans use to communicate the most.
Yeah. You can find me across social media as well at Hardman, spelled H4RDMAN. Well, Derek, thank you for joining me for another episode of the Rouge Rugby, and thank you all for joining us as we've talked about real Canadian rugby. We hope you can join us again next time.